Okay, thank you, everyone. So right now we want to start the discussion panel, and the first discussion panel in the morning is a business discussion panel with the topic how to better share data insights to assist business and community. And coming to the panel today, let me introduce about first we have the panel lead Nicole Wright. She is the data analyst manager at Unbounce. Also, she also moonlight as an artist. Um, and then in the panel, we have Annie Ying. She is the manager at the Cisco AI Lab. And then we have Christine Wollman. She is the president of Radico AIO. And last but not least, we have Mei Li. She is the data analytics manager at Best Buy. And with that, please welcome the whole panel with me.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thanks for joining us today. I just heard that there was even a wait list to get in. So it's really great that we have such a strong turnout. So we're going to try and talk about communication today, which I'm sure we've all experienced is hard when we're trying to share technical insights, trying to understand how to tell our stakeholders what our models are doing, how to provide business insight. It's tricky, for sure. So we're going to get some opinions today on how to do that better, how to move through a project from beginning to end so that you know what success means, so that you know what failure means, and how you communicate that in the best way possible. So I guess maybe we can talk a little bit about ourselves. Thanks for having us here. So I'm Nicole, manager of data analytics at Unbounce. We do our data analyst team does a lot of data science work. We do a lot of forecasting. We create models to do some predictions. We also do a lot of BI reporting. We come from it from a different perspective, where we're pretty strong in the technical side. So that's sort of my scope of experience. Do you guys want to go ahead?
Sure. My name is Christine Wiedemann, and I'm the president of Radical IO. We're a technology consultancy and lab here in Yaletown. And we build enterprise solutions and really data-driven solutions. So we help our clients understand how to integrate different data sources and different data sets, and how to take that data and turn it into information and knowledge, and also, of course, how to access it. By training, I'm a particle physicist, so I'm used to working with large data sets. And when I started my thesis work back in 2001, the tools available were a little bit different than today, but I used neural networks and I used machine learning to do my analysis, and I ended up writing a lot of code, extending a lot of code. And I would say maybe my claim to fame is that I had an experimental data set of 2.3 billion events. And after all my filtering, there was one left that was maybe a real one. So I'm not only used to large data, I'm very familiar with how to reduce it to nothing. Super excited to be here today, and I still have a very strong interest in data, but these days I look at it more from a business perspective, and that's why I'm very excited about this panel.
So I'm Mei. I'm the data analytics manager at Best Buy, which I don't think needs a lot of introduction. I'm sure most of you here are familiar. And so I'm actually embedded within the finance team, so my role within that area is to kind of help champion and build out data capabilities for the finance team, because we're such a key business partner for the other business groups within the company when we're making decisions. And also a huge component of my role is kind of like partnering up with various business groups, highlighting the capabilities that data analysts can bring and help make better decisions. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today.
Hi, my name is Annie. I'm the manager of Cisco AI Lab in Vancouver. So this AI Lab is part of a bigger centralized organization within Cisco that is new. So part of the challenge is to define and partner with units within Cisco to make them more data-driven, do predictive analytics. So Cisco's business areas includes security, their sales data, their customer data. So I would say the role so far, this lab's pretty new, only like 6 months. So, being in a role where, in a team where we're trying to define what decentralized data science team means to the company, that's also why I'm also really interested in this panel. I think some of the questions really touch on that. My background, I have a scientific background, I have a PhD in computer science. I also was a software engineer for a number of years. So really interested in software engineering issues like deploying models, integration, but also from the scientific side, how do you provide systematic framework to look at data sets problem?
I think the mic has a problem, sorry.
Oh, no worries. So that's me.
Oh, now we can hear you. Did everybody hear okay? Is that, yeah, great, okay. Now we'll just be a little bit louder, I guess. Thanks, everybody. It sounds like we have a really interesting background here, and can probably, lean on a lot of our experience, a lot of technical experience, a lot of academic experience in this panel. So that's super interesting. So for our first, oh, that sounds bad. Let's see.
You want it to be louder? That's one kind of loud.
How about if I just speak loudly? Is that fine? How's that now? Oh, that's better. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Sorry. So the first question that we want to get into is around contributing from the start of a project. So I don't know how many people here are working on technical teams or analyst teams, but when you have a business department come to you and they've sort of completed their project and then they say, but how did we do? That's not the most efficient way or effective way to gain insight. When you could have been there from the beginning. You could have helped to define what those metrics would have been right from the get-go. We anecdotally find that data teams are often looped in at the end of a project to track performance. This means that the company's not using the team to their full capability. Data teams can be super beneficial, of course, to those initiatives from the beginning because of their expertise. So how do you assess the impact of a business initiative? How do you experiment? How do you identify success metrics or KPIs right from the beginning? So the question that I have is what leads to the gap?
So I can start first because I actually just recently encountered this example within Best Buy. So it's funny because we were actually brought in at the beginning to define the problem, generate the insights, and this is a market level analysis. And we made the recommendations and we kind of left it at the hands of the operators to execute on it. And then about a month later, after the presentation, we were brought in again and says like, so we did this. Can you now measure our performance? And we're like, we didn't know that you were doing this. And so because we weren't involved, even in that execution phase, the data that was generated from the execution of it was a little bit noisy and made the analysis just so much harder. And so I think like, even for Best Buy, where we're a huge company, with 1,200 employees, executors, like they move really fast and sometimes the communication doesn't keep up. And that's where that breakdown in silos could happen and we just get pulled in the last minute.
Yeah, so it's a matter of communication,
Correct.
in a sense, to say like, oh, we didn't keep tabs often enough.
Yes.
Or like, yeah, we were there from the beginning, but then what happened? We just kind of dropped off and we moved on to our other projects.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very common problem that applies to not only data science teams, but a lot of other teams. In general, I think for some reason, the way our brains are wired, we like to have a list of tasks that we execute in sequence. And we expect to have something to work on and then someone who works on that. And I worked in software testing for a long time, and it's the same thing. You're expected to come in when the product's built, you test it, and you're done. And of course, it doesn't work that way. But we don't seem to really be good at acknowledging that all tasks take setup, a preparation, and you need to plan for it. So I think the gap comes there are a lot of different reasons for the gap. Some of it is also that we don't know a lot about data science yet. And I think just using the concept is kind of problematic because we mean very different things by it. So when we talk about data science, I think we still always need to provide a brief definition. And when we don't know something very well, we don't know what to expect. And that makes it hard to see a value of someone contributing up front. Because we don't really know what to ask for. We tend to not be comfortable with ambiguity. So we kind of want to run through our phases of our project, and it doesn't matter that we say we adopted the agile mindset or that we use modern project methodologies. At the end of the day, we tend to be very structural and sequential. So I think that gap, it kind of happens by itself very easily, and we have to consciously work against it. And from a data science perspective, sometimes you're just not going to know what's happening, and that makes it really hard to counter it. But you have to try to be proactive. You have to communicate, like you were saying. And you also need to be good at articulating the value you provide. You can't expect people to know that or assume that they understand how valuable it is. So articulating the value and proving the value, I think, is really important, and the communication, proactive communication. Even though sometimes it might just mean you have to go to someone and ask, are you doing something? Nope. Next week. Are you doing something now? Which might sound silly, but I don't know that there's always a way around it yet. Hopefully it will change over time.
Yes. Yeah, and that's something that we keep reminding ourselves too. Like, if you want to be at the seat at the table, you have to show the value, deliver the value, and then when you have that track record going, then people will tend to keep you top of mind. It's like, hey, what about their perspective, right? And that's when you know, like, yes, we did it as a data team.
That's a really good point, for sure. Like, I think I like what you said too about articulating from the beginning, what does data science mean within the scope of this project? And if everybody's on board, if everybody has the same definition, that's important to start there. And then if you keep saying, this is where we're at, this is where we're at, or where are you at, you keep top of mind. And I like that idea a lot of saying, okay, I'm proving my worth or the worth of my team by saying, yeah, we're on it, we're here, this is where we're at, and this is where we're gonna be.
I really agree with all your points. I also think a big cause of this issue is the expectation. Like, you use the term data team and you use data science. Like, to me, those terms are already different. And there's also machine learning teams. So I think, just us knowing the definition is probably not enough. And even among data scientists, we probably have different definitions. So I think just even communicating what your team does to the business and, concretely, lead them to ideas, suggestions, maybe even just in a meeting to mention certain data would be best collected this way, and then it will enable you to do X, Y, Z. Making them to see the value, I think it would really help.
That's really, I'll just say quickly, that's really interesting that, I think that it would be, you could be different, your team or as an individual, you could be something different to different departments. Like if you're speaking to a marketing team, data science to a marketing team is going to look different from data science to your security team.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on to that. When we don't define things, we allow them to be a little bit mythical creatures. So there's a sense of magic. There's just this thing, data science, that's going to do something. And magic can happen at any time, right? So if it's magical, why shouldn't you just be able to come in at the end of a project and provide all the information someone asks for? So I think we're doing ourselves a huge disfavor by not defining and letting it be mythical. And the problem with that too is that if you're part of that team, it's kind of neat to be mythical too. So you have to really make sure that you sometimes lower expectations a little bit and make it more realistic and concrete, even though it takes some of the glamour away, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. There's like a bit of humility there, saying
Absolutely.
like, especially if you're on, I'm on a machine learning team or something like that, and say like, oh no, I'm just like running some computations actually.
It's not as fun, that's it. Just doing math.
Yeah, exactly. I just hit execute on the program.
I really like, how you mentioned the humility part. I actually think, like for example, looking at data science problems, many times people, think of, it as a magical way, and then there's all these glamorous things they use the KPI for. I guess I'm a little bit ahead of myself in terms of questions, but for example, I think it's actually really important to communicate what data science cannot do, and I think we don't always think about it that way. Like, what is the upper bounds of certain model behaving? These are experiments that we can run to determine that and communicate to the stakeholder up front. So things like that, I think it's all about communication, as you said. And depending on the team, depending on the problem, it's a different set of things you communicate. I don't think there's a one answer to that. But I really like, the word humility that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that there can be a lot of like status and ego around it, and I think it's nice, and it helps everybody to feel more comfortable when we can take it down to, like, we all just do our jobs, and this job is a little bit different from this job, but I don't know, I feel like if you can have empathy with your stakeholders, and everybody, if you've well communicated what exactly you're talking about, the communication is a lot easier, or the updates on progress and setting expectations can be easier. So I'm actually going to jump ahead to a question that follows up on that, because I think the whole managing expectations piece, I think is really important. So our question, how do you coordinate expectations between the data science team and stakeholders?
That's interesting, because it's something that I have to kind of like contend with on a day-to-day basis. Like kind of mentioned, like data science has this sort of connotation of being mythical, and so you end up going to meetings and you tell them, hey, like this is going to take months of like just diving into the data, blah blah blah, and they're like, really? And so a framing device that I like to use, and this is one of my previous manager, he trained me to do this, was like, go into a meeting, and when you're talking to stakeholders, give them options, a menu of options, right? So what my personal analogy is using cars. So do you want the Toyota model, do you want the Lexus model, or do you want the Ferrari model? And so each of them has different level of cost, but all of them get you from point A to point B to achieve what you want. Just as different level of commitment, resources that we need to put in, but different level of sort of performance as well, right? So once that is being laid out, I find that really help drive the conversation around like, so the stakeholders will now be like, oh, maybe not the Ferrari, I just need the Toyota for now, right? So I find that personally very helpful. I don't know about you guys.
I actually do very similar thing.
Nice.
I'm going to borrow your analogy. I really like the car analogy. I just do like level 1, level 2, level 10.
Yeah.
But the same thing.
Yeah.
I really love that.
Yeah.
I can borrow it.
Yeah, for sure.
Because no one wants to hear, no, we can't do that, right? We can always do it. There's always a way. No matter what people ask for, there is a way, but are they willing to pay the price for it, right? So when you start a conversation around goals or expectations with a no, that can't be done, there's no going back to a happy place after that. You're saying, sure, we can do that. That would cost you $5 million in 6 years. Or we can do this, which is probably what you need. But talking about expectations, it's so important to really understand what your stakeholders need. What is it they're looking for? Because they might ask for something that doesn't make sense to you, and it doesn't actually make sense to them either.
Yeah.
But if they don't have the training or the expertise or skill to understand what makes sense, it's hard. Because they have a business need, right? It's not going to be based necessarily on technology. So you need to help them understand what questions do they want to ask, or do they need to ask. That's a business discussion. Once you know what questions they want to ask, you need to figure out, can you ask those questions of the data? That's a data discussion. Once you get to that point, you also need to know, is it actually implementable? So that's a very technical developer question to answer. So there are several steps, and you need to get through all of them before you can talk about, okay, this is actually what the expectations for this project are. And I think often what happens in a discussion is we handle all those three levels at the same time from our own perspective, and we don't realize we're talking about very different things.
Yeah.
So we talk about a question, and I will think of it from a business perspective, touching my mic, and someone else would think of it from a developer perspective and the data perspective, and we all come up with our own answer, and we move ahead, everyone's happy, 3 months go by, and everyone is not so happy anymore. So recognizing those different perspectives and having those discussions up front where you can still adapt and be flexible, I think is super important.
And even, I was just thinking before, even prior to that, saying, okay, these are the business questions you're asking. What need are you serving by asking those questions? So you may be asking the question in one way, but what are you really trying to get at?
Yes.
Right, trying to identify that from the very beginning, because maybe there is some training in data literacy that isn't like 100%, right? So maybe people are asking questions of us that aren't really formulated in the right way, or they don't really get at what you wanted to know for your business. And so even getting to that first, which I personally find really hard, allows you, I think, to ask the right questions and then to look at it from the developer perspective and say, can we actually answer this with the data?
I really want to add on to what you just said. Many times I get people in the business saying, I want to build a neural network block. So they tell you the how part first without knowing, well, this is kind of our job to kind of figure it out, how to achieve that. But what I really need is really understand the problem. So the what part, so like what you said, like what do they need? And then I can help you figure out, is it a machine learning model even? Sometimes it's not. Maybe just a business dashboard would suffice.
Definitely. Like, you want to know, did your marketing campaign result in a paid 1x conversion rate that was favorable? But you don't, if people come to you and say, I need a neural net that's going to tell me marketing attribution. Maybe. It's funny. So, and then actually follow up to that, how do you ensure that your stakeholders have enough data literacy? And then caveat to that, how do you know? How can you tell? Go ahead.
I actually want to add on top of that. Again, I think it's communication going back. But what I find useful is to involve stakeholders more than just like, set up a meeting, ask them the questions, but involve them as part of the experiment. So I like to think of data science work as experiments. So, doing a Kaggle competition, those are really, you're trying to achieve a certain accuracy, great. But then there are other types of experiments that I think sometimes people forget or maybe not aware. That's part of data science team's job. For example, even figuring out what it is they need. I like a lot experiments made popular by the user research community, the UX community. Wizard of Oz study, which is the type of experiments where you're trying to, instead of build a model first, trying to walk with the stakeholder to really see what do they need without even generating the model. Like if a human were to do it, how would even the workflow look like? So really try to understand the workflow or like the data needs, what they need first by a systematic method before you even build a model. And I think in that way, it's also part of education and communication too. Then I think they would kind of set the expectation in the meantime, and they would also feel like they're involved.
Do you mean, even, so from a UX perspective, do you mean qualitative research?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
getting signal from user research, from talking to people.
Exactly.
Just as a broad scope, like get some signal, like just to
Yeah,
generate ideas, and
exactly.
having the data team being actually involved in that work, like from the beginning.
Yeah, and the data team driving that, and having the business team as kind of the users of the qualitative research is interesting. I actually gave a talk on that topic last year in the conference.
Interesting.
So the use of qualitative research in data science, which is not, we are all more like quantitative people, as data science experts, but I think there's a lot in qualitative methods that we can learn from, like interviews, even looking at errors from models afterwards in a qualitative way manually versus, only looking at the quantitative metrics.
No, I think that that's something that we forget as well as data scientists, that qualitative research it's still data.
Exactly. Yeah.
If we're not aggregating 5 billion rows, it's still data.
Totally.
Although coming from a perspective of working with enormous data sets, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think I'd like to take a step back and just say that I think it's super important to remember that it's the stakeholders that make the decisions. And when they make the decisions, they're the ones that absorb the risk that go with those decisions. So sometimes we like to try to push people a bit too much in one direction or another. And I think of it a little bit, it's like buying a present for someone. Are you going to buy what the person should have or what they want to have? And buying people what they should have is not going to be good for the relationship with that person in the long run. You probably should get them what they want to have, right? And the stakeholders, sometimes what they want is not necessarily what's best for them. You try to educate them, but at the end of the day, they're the ones making the decision. And we shouldn't lose track of that, because again, they are absorbing the risk. We typically aren't. And you talked about how do you educate people, and it's hard. You do it slowly. You can't expect people to necessarily learn on their own, though. That's, I think, asking a little bit too much. So engaging them in conversation, I think, is super important. Except that it's going to be a slow trickle. You're not going to sit them down and do like an 8-hour class and they're going to be experts. And providing the information and the context at a level that they understand. So providing information in a format they can digest, which is typically going to be different from your own preferred format, I think.
Yeah. And I also find that sometimes, at least in the context of Best Buy, is that the barriers of entry can be seem to be perceived to be high to a lot of these folks. It's not that they don't want to, but they have a fear in them. It's like, oh, this is too hard, whatever it is. And I am always like, I always consider myself like an evangelist. It's like, no, it's not that hard, and let me show you, and just kind of like bring them into the room. And it's like, look, this is how you do Power BI dashboard, and these are the data sources here. These are all the documentation. And like, I always try to be present for like whenever people have questions. So like that really helps sort of like that slow trickle of like data literacy and education throughout the company. It's just like be approachable and lower all barriers to entry. I find is very useful.
Totally. That's one of my favorite parts of my job, is being able to be an evangelist and to teach. And to just to try and be as approachable as possible and say, like, let's just work through this together. If you have a question, let's write some SQL together. Like, this is what our dashboarding UI looks like. This is how you use it. Just like try dragging this attribute over. Like, what's that going to look like? I don't know. Let's try it together. And that having that approachability, I think, as well, kind of puts it all on the same level.
That all goes back to killing the myth around it, right?
Yes.
That's what you're talking about, which I think is super important.
Yeah.
If you can picture unicorns, you're probably not having the right kind of conversation.
So let's talk about evaluation and the success of a project. So from a management perspective, when you're looking at a data science project, what are you looking for in terms of outcome? That is, how do you know when a project is successful? Are there repeatable KPIs that you can evaluate? Is it one-off?
I'm going to tie it back to the last question on expectation, because the success metric, it highly relates back to the expectation, because success, what does it even mean? So I find it, I found some success in my own work when, going back to involving the stakeholder and engaging them from the beginning. So as opposed to thinking like, oh, I'm going to do like a Kaggle competition, I'm going to make up a problem statement and achieve the best, accuracy possible. You have to, I find success in my own work in startup, in corporate, get them involved, get the stakeholders involved in defining the problem through qualitative methods like interviews. Get them involved with the progress you're making. So as opposed to trying to just like optimize the model and 2 months later come back to them, show them progress. Like, when you have the initial model, show them results. Like, even though you may not have deployed the results, but even if you have some initial results, walk them through, maybe even just one case for, if you're analyzing certain groups of marketing segment, maybe just present them one segment and then walk through the results and see, is that what you want? And then you can build or optimize the model further. But I guess that also relates back to the first question of how, many times we are not consulted to the end, but I think I've also seen teams, or I've done it myself too, just being so heads down and so concentrated and optimizing the model that we forget this is actually for the stakeholders at the end. It's not a puzzle that we're trying to solve on our own.
Yeah. And just to build off on that is, so one thing we talk about internally is like outputs versus outcome, right? So output is like your model, your algorithm, your presentation, but then what is the outcome of that? And how we like to look at that is it actionable, right? Is this something that the business can take and like do something about it? Like if you throw them a model and then be like, okay, so you have 99% accuracy, so what, right?
Yep.
And so like that's what we try to look for, which is outcome, actionable items that the business can take and execute on. And I guess like as a data team, like we can internally measure our own success by saying like, of all these insights and recommendations that we generated, how many were action? And if there were action, what was the business value? I mean, I am from finance, so I have a bias, but work with your finance partners, figure out what is the business value that's being derived out of this, or foregone if actions were not taken.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the only really valid definition of success is meeting expectations. So it doesn't matter what amazing work you do or what models you define, did you meet the expectations? And if you then don't have those early discussions around what the expectations are, it's almost impossible to succeed, right? So you need to have a shared understanding upfront about what the expectations are. And I'll share my best speaker tips with you that I've ever gotten. Whenever I do a presentation, I start by asking the room for expectations. I write them down on sticky notes and I put them on the wall. So at the end of the presentation, I can take your sticky note and say, you expected unicorns. I gave you unicorns. You are happy. And it works. Part of it is psychology, right? It's also okay, of course, to change the expectations throughout the project, but then it should be a new discussion where you reset. Because we talk about metrics and how you measure. And of course, as an experimentalist and a physicist, I'm always wary of metrics, because as soon as you try to measure something, you're impacting what you're measuring. So you have to be careful. And what you measure should be against what you're trying to achieve. So you can't have generic metrics that you apply to every project. It's what matters on this project. And if I measure it, how does it tell me something about my success criteria? And again, talking about it, the communication piece, because if we just say the expectation is Y and we don't clarify what that means in a language that everyone can understand, we're still going to walk away with different understandings of what it is we're trying to do.
So it sounds like there are not repeatable KPIs, which is really good to hear. It's really good to hear all of your opinions on that, because it's something that I know we've struggled with at my company as well, to say, how do we know if it's successful? How do we know that we're making an impact? And for us, we lean on impacting business strategy. I was saying, if we've made some impact or had some effect on some strategic decision, that's success. But I really like the idea of saying, if we met your expectations, if we did the thing that you asked, whatever that was, if we delivered on that, that's success, regardless of the outcome. Yeah, that's super interesting. And so then what about, I see that we have a ton of questions, which is awesome. So I think that I'm just gonna ask one more question here, and then we'll get to all of your questions. So sort of follow up on evaluating success. So what about disaster avoidance? How do you deal with, I mean, I imagine we're an objective community, but what happens when a stakeholder comes to you and expects to be proven right, and then the data shows otherwise? How do you handle that situation?
I think get engaging the stakeholders from the beginning, and then running experiments like what is the upper bound of certain model. I think that will really protect you down the road on the expectation. You're already setting the right expectation for them, as opposed to, having that unknown. So I think it's about risk mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how many of you have a software engineering background. So in software engineering team, there are agile methodology to try to mitigate risk. And I think data science project even have more risk, because you could be building a model, you don't know whether the model will work until you run the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's especially important to going back to expectation, but also like communicate that and use experiments to your own advantage. Show from the data that this is your upper bound. This is the best result you can get, or like use your early suggestions on the different options.
But I think like when it comes down to it, and let's say that someone strongly believes in something, and we were brought in too late, like unfortunately there's really no way around it except be honest and upfront about it. I mean, the last thing we want to do is start p-hacking, and that's not good, right? So, and hopefully that throughout this journey that we have delivered enough value and gained enough sort of that capital, that reputational capital, to kind of like spend in this like, look, I've proven many times I have a track record, so believe me that the data does not support that, right? So that could be a strategy.
Yeah, I think we're talking about two types of failures. Failure to achieve what we set out to do, and failure to deliver the results that someone expected. Mm-hmm. And they need different strategies. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, people have strong opinions about what they think the data will reveal, and they're not always correct. Mm-hmm. And that's purely a communication problem, where you need to learn how to deliver bad news. And as a software tester, I'm an expert at delivering bad news. But it takes skill, it takes empathy, it takes practice. Mm-hmm. And you need to really be very careful with how you deliver it, because people can easily feel stupid and get very defensive. Yeah. So I would say that's a pure communication problem. When it comes to failure at doing what we set out to do, it's partly communication too, and how early we realize that we're not going to achieve it. If you have a 6-month project and realize week 8 that this is maybe not going as well as we thought, and you talk about it then, you're not going to fail. You will have learned something, you change your objectives, and you keep going. If you don't talk about it or realize until there's 2 weeks left of the project, that is a problem. Mm-hmm. So it's more making sure you have that continuous communication, showing results early, having frequent, transparent interactions with stakeholders. That prevents failure, I think, even if things don't work out the way you expected them to.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues on a project a few weeks ago hosted a pre-mortem meeting.
Oh.
And so we'll often have a post-mortem or a retro and talk about what happened. But what we were doing in the pre-mortem was imagining what might go wrong and dealing with it ahead of time.
I like that.
I liked it too. It was really interesting, and it's even from like an interpersonal point of view, it's an interesting strategy because you say, what are all the, this is morbid, what are all the things that could go wrong? But how would I cope with each of those? Am I capable of coping with every possible disaster? Like, what's my strategy? And I just kind of liked that idea of saying, like, right from the beginning, what might go wrong on this project? And what's my sort of plan of attack if it does?
It's a very nice risk-driven approach.
It was really interesting. I think that I'm going to move on to our audience questions. Please. Thank you. Okay, so that doesn't happen again. Okay, so we have a few questions here. So first one, how have you navigated the sometimes longer timelines of data science workflows using more robust statistical techniques versus quick and dirty analysis? Great question.
Depends on what you're trying to do and what the risks are.
Yeah.
It's understanding, I think understanding risk is fundamental to everything we do in software development, and that means understanding impact and likelihood. If the impact and likelihood is low, go with quick and dirty as much as you like. Are you going to reuse it or not? Who's going to use it in the future? Are you trying to get a sense for something to run a different project? It's understanding risk, understanding purpose.
Yeah, I would say the quick and dirty way is a very easy way to figure out what your risks are, right?
Yeah.
Does it warrant a more deeper, more quantitative way of doing things, right? So like, yeah, it's like the 80-20 rule, right? So.
I agree with everything. I guess just one thing, again, it depends on the project. Just like your answer to the previous question. It depends on the project. I don't think there's one answer to that.
So follow up to that, what if the stakeholder expects a Ferrari, but they're only willing to pay for a Toyota?
I'll tell them just that. Expect a Ferrari, and you're paying for a Toyota.
Yeah, just be realistic about it.
There's no way around it. It's just how you present the information.
Yeah.
Here's the Ferrari, this is what you get, this is how much it cost. Here's the Toyota, this is what you get, this is what the price is.
Yeah. And I guess you could kind of be a little bit tactful about that, right? So it's about how you deliver that. It's like, no way in hell, well, it's not gonna fly.
There's a time and place for that too.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that metaphor is really powerful, actually, and using something like that. Like, I think we've called it T-shirt sizing in our company before, but I really like because it's super obvious with the car model, and yeah, I think that it translates well for stakeholders. It's sort of easy to understand, like, oh no, I really want the Ferrari, but then it's going to take you 6 months or a year. You know, and how important is the decision you're trying to make? Is it worth 6 months of effort? So here's one that's a little bit different. Have you worked with organizations with very low data literacy and a mistrust of data? What was the context and what did you do?
I think there is a lot of mistrust of data in general, and the problem is, of course, that if you give me a data set, I can tell you whatever you want the data to say, right? And if you don't have an ethical approach to it, you can remove outliers, you can filter the data, how you pre-process it. You can pretty much create whatever you want from it. And sometimes people have bad experiences, and sometimes people really want to be proven right, back to Nicole's point. And if you don't do that, they're not going to trust your results. So a lot of it goes back to having integrity and having credibility when you go into the discussion. But there are also going to be situations where people don't trust you and they don't trust the data. And you might want to walk away from that situation because there's not going to be a positive outcome.
And I also find that even if, let's say, in general, the consensus, it seems like is a low level of data literacy, but you may just find that one person within that group that is a little bit more advanced in that sense, I would say like leverage those folks, right? Start building that relationship, start from there, because then that's how like that network sort of starts spreading. So that's been effective for me in the past.
So the centralized data science department at Cisco is new, so I'm really in this situation of there's a sea of data collected by different teams, and being able to make sense of it. I think just going back to what we've been discussing, yeah, it's like building the reputation, communication. Yeah, it's communication.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just quickly add, to recognize situations where people actually want you to fail. It is rare, but it does happen, and that's not going to be a situation where you can succeed.
Yeah.
If people are sort of inviting you to come in and prove how data science and data is not trustworthy, you don't really stand a chance, and it does happen, even though hopefully it's getting more and more rare.
That speaks to your point about identifying that situation and saying, I'm not probably going to be able to change this person's mind, so maybe this is one where I walk away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. And then I just wanted to say, to sort of echo the point that you made that having a point of contact in different business departments. In our company, we have sort of mentorship relationships between the data team and other business departments, where we say we pair people and say, now we have a revenue point of contact, and we know that that person works one-on-one with somebody in data, so that even if the rest of the revenue unit isn't quite as data literate, we know that that person definitely is. And they're going to come to us for reviews when they have questions, when they want to work through a problem, when they want some strategic advice. We know that we've created that bond already, and that has been really effective for us.
Yeah.
We'll just take a couple more questions here because we're almost up on time. How do you get stakeholders or data consumers to take responsibility for data governance?
Good question.
It is a good question.
I think the options approach, like showing them, if you do data governance, you can get your Ferrari with a cheaper price.
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes down to communication and building that relationship.
Yeah, and to your point, to articulate the value of doing it. You can't just say, you should, it's a good idea. It's what are the benefits, and what's going to happen if you don't do it?
Yeah. Because you really want them to buy in to this idea of building data governance, right? And so that's why we kind of have to show the value, communicate the value in a way that they understand, and it's part of that journey. We have to bring people along for that journey, right?
Yeah, I think the problem in general is that we don't really like preemptive actions until it's hurt us. It's like buying an insurance, right? We like to pay the insurance premium. But that's sort of how you have to approach those discussions. It's use the same argument as to why you buy insurance, more or less.
And then, so I feel like this is sort of related, following up on that. From a management perspective, or a business lead, in a community that is clearly like hungry for information and wants to grow in their careers, how do you balance helping people grow in their careers to use and learn shiny new models versus solving immediate business needs with tried and true methods?
Hackathons are a very good way of introducing people to that concept, or kind of like test out the new shiny stuff. Because I am more sort of more closely working with the business. So for me, my mandate is that delivering that business value. But we can't forget that like data science itself is very R&D, very sort of like testing out new methods and new methodology, and just making time for that, right? So hackathon we find is a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, I think it's super important to set aside time for it, but to really constrain the scope. time boxing it or saying we're only doing this piece, because otherwise it's going to take however much time is available, right? And then when you start to have the reining people in, it's disheartening to have that happen to you. So when you know up front that, okay, this is how much time or effort is available to do it, then people are more okay with working within those frames, I think.
Yeah, great ideas. In my team, we have kind of a reading group, lunch and learn. So actually, as opposed to having the whole group read that paper, we would have one person reading the paper and then presenting it, just to even time box them more. We also have a great data science community here in Vancouver. We learn data science meetup group. They read the latest bleeding edge papers published from last week. So I think encouraging employees who are interested to go to those meetups.
I think, yeah, that's a good point, because we don't, unfortunately in our jobs, guessing your jobs are like my job, we don't have time to just like play all the time. You know, as much as you want to just like play with a new model all day long, you have to do your BI dashboarding. It's like part of the deal.
I'll just throw in there, I think it's super important to be cross-disciplinary, so I try to really encourage people to learn outside of the field. Do other things, read a book on psychology or listen to an economy podcast. Because I think that's really important to build your skill set and be able to apply your technical skills in a business context. So sometimes, yeah, people see those shiny new objects, they want to play with them, and sometimes they actually narrow their own breadth of experience down too much. So helping people to see the bigger picture a little bit more is important too.
Yeah, for sure. I think that podcasts they're probably like a really good way to spark creativity and ingenuity and to learn more about what's very current. I think that's a really good call out. And that's something interesting too that you can do. So I wouldn't want to say to the people at my company, go home and do this definitely on your off time.
Yeah, right.
Like maybe that's not what they want to do. Maybe they want to go to pottery on their off time. But something like a podcast is a little bit lower investment, and it still allows you to get access to new, interesting information.
Yeah, you're probably commuting into work anyway, so you can listen to an audiobook or listen to a podcast. So I think you're absolutely right that you should encourage people's learning outside of work hours. That is not going to be cumbersome or take a lot of effort. Something that's easy to do and energizing instead of draining.
Yeah, exactly. Go play with this spreadsheet on your off time.
Some people find that so that's a judge.
Depends who you are.
I like spreadsheets.
Yeah, I think about them on my off time. And I think that maybe let's take our last question, because we've spoken a lot about, or a bit about definitions. So in that light, in a world where we're blurring the lines between job titles, like data science engineer or analyst, how do you become a jack of all trades to meet the expectations of a company? Or do you?
You're not going to meet the expectations of the company. You can pick almost any role description or a job ad for any job that I can do, and I'm not going to fit those criteria. It's not going to happen. Personally, I'm a big believer in Tshape skills. You need breadth and you need depth in one area. Both are super important, and you can't just have one. You can't be a Renaissance person anymore. There's too much to know. And if you're a specialist, you're not going to add as much value, and you're going to be super vulnerable to changes in technology and the job market. So breadth and depth.
Yeah, I really like that T-shape because I think that's like a term that's being used commonly for data scientists, because there's a lot of debate around like data science and engineering, data science, data analysts, what are they? And so like having breadth is super important, super marketable for sure. And I would say like go beyond your job description, right? You're here to deliver value for the company, and once you get to a point, you get to write your own job description, right? So the job title really doesn't matter anymore at that point.
I would add to that, I think especially in the Vancouver market, the more small and medium-sized businesses, the Tshape definitely applies. I'm sure if you work for bigger companies, you can be more specialized. There are probably roles that you can just, you're an expert. You did your PhD in image recognition. There would be a job for that in certain bigger companies, in the States, and so on. But I think for the Vancouver market, with more small and medium-sized businesses, I think a T-shaped skill set makes sense.
I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. So what it means sort of practically for the rest, anybody else who hasn't heard it before, just as a practical example, does that mean I'm a data analyst and I also have a little bit of engineering skills and I know something about writing ETLs and I can use a model to do some forecasting, but then I'm really good at financial analysis.
Yeah, and I would say for myself, being T-shaped means I can write code, I can test code, I can do some level of data science. I'm good at communication, but my expertise is in software testing. That's my focus area, and especially exploratory testing side. And it looks a bit different for different people, but it's, being able to do a lot of things to a certain level, but excelling in one area, having your strength in one area.
Basically, you need full stack.
Yeah. Yeah, if we were all software developers, we'd just say that we were full stack.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's especially important in small businesses where, in order to engage the stakeholders for a discussion, you want to show them results quickly. So you may not get the support from the software engineering team up front, but you can still sort of build some models and present some results early on. So I think that's the value in having that T-shaped.
And being able to talk to business and understanding different perspectives, different languages and so on.
Yeah, definitely. It's a language thing. If you have some familiarity with the way that different meeting groups are speaking, then you can sit in there and you can participate and not be totally lost. You don't have to be an expert, but like if I'm familiar, which is some terminology, it's going to go a long way, I think. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everybody, for all of your wonderful answers. Thank you guys for your questions, and enjoy the rest of the conference.